Sadie Quinn thought she was just another forgotten supply girl on a cold trail, until the night she lay broken in the snow, her wagon overturned, blood on her temple, her last breath a whisper, "Don't let me die alone." Out of that silent storm, the richest man no one ever saw, Wyatt Holloway, rode down from his hidden mountain to fight for a woman he'd barely spoken to. Fists slammed in the dark woods, a revolver lost to the snow, a promise found in the storm. "I'm not losing you too," Wyatt growled as he lifted her from the frozen ground. Why did he break his vow of silence for her? This isn't just a rescue. It's a truth buried deeper than any gold. Sadie Quinn wasn't born tough. She was made that way, hammered into something unbreakable by the same hard land that took her husband. At 26, she'd already lived through more winters than she cared to count. She still remembered the last time she saw Elijah Quinn ride out beneath a sky so wide it seemed it could swallow him whole. He'd worn his Sunday shirt, even though it was Thursday, and he'd turned in the saddle just once to tip his hat, his grin crooked under the dust and the promise that he'd come back rich with cattle contracts and glory. But the Rio Grande didn't care for promises, and the bullet that ended him had no name. Word came back wrapped in a Union flag, a folded letter stiff with blood at one corner. They told Sadie it was quick, but she knew better. Elijah was a fighter. He never did anything quick except break her heart. She buried him in Wyoming soil she couldn't afford to leave, then strapped on her boots, hitched up an old freight wagon, and told grief to keep up if it could. 3 winters on the trail turned Sadie Quinn into something the folks in Mercy Hill didn't quite know what to do with. Some said she was cursed, a young widow with no baby to show for her trouble and no kin to haul her back east. She took jobs that no good woman should, driving goods up to cabins so far off the map they might as well belong to ghosts. She knew every rutted ridge and switchback by heart. At the general store, the old men spat tobacco and muttered, "She's got more grit than half these ranch boys, but Lord, she'll break her neck on that Red Hollow run." The younger ones tried to be funny. "I heard she sleeps with her rifle like it's her man. Best be careful, or she'll put a bullet in you for breathing too loud." Sadie pretended not to hear, but every whisper found its place in the hollow of her ribs. If they wanted to talk, let them. Words were just wind. The run-up to Red Hollow Ridge was her worst and best all at once. It paid enough to keep her mule fed and her boots patched. Just barely. But it meant 6 hours alone, with only the groan of the trees for company. That morning, the fog rolled in early, curling low across the earth like a dying breath. She cinched her scarf tighter around her throat. The mule, old Finch, flicked his ears but pressed on. Somewhere up the trail, pines leaned together like old conspirators. The air tasted of iron and ice. Sadie liked to imagine the mountain watched her. Not like a monster, but like something old and wise enough to know that a woman alone in the cold was both threat and prayer. She'd seen broken wagons in these woods before. Wagons that never made it back down the switchback. Folks called it cursed land, but Sadie figured curses had more to do with people than the dirt under their boots. The supply slip for this cabin was always the same. Cross pine provisions, winter grade, leave by porch. No return address, no name but a scrawl at the bottom, WH. She knew what the initials stood for. Everybody did. Wyatt Holloway, the richest ghost Mercy Hill ever whispered about. Once he owned half the basin, now he owned a cabin no one saw him leave. Some said he sat inside counting gold. Others swore he'd gone half mad, waiting for a woman who never came back. Sadie didn't care for ghost stories, not when there was real work to do. The ridge crested slow. Her breath fogged the air when she pulled the mule to a halt. Red Hollow spread below, a shallow basin of frost-brittle grass and pine shadows. At its heart, the cabin. Rough logs, dark with weather. The porch sagged under its own weight. No smoke, no dog barking. Just a single rail with an old sign, letters half-rotted. "Leave by porch." Sadie climbed down, her boots cracking the frost. She moved the crates one by one. Dried beans, lard, nails, salt. She stacked them neat as a prayer. Then she felt it. Not sound, not breath. Just the prickle at her nape. Eyes. She turned slow. Up in the loft window behind frost and shadow, a shape moved. Not close enough to see a face, but enough to know she was not alone. She tipped her hat, voice steady in the empty clearing. "Goods delivered. Same time next month." No answer, no motion, just the quiet watching. And as she climbed back onto the wagon, she told herself the mountain kept its secrets, but maybe not all of them forever. Sadie Quinn had learned early that a woman alone in a frontier town was never truly alone, not when men's mouths worked twice as fast as their hands. Mercy Hill was a place where gossip stuck to you like burrs on a saddle blanket. You couldn't brush it off, only learn to live with the sting. It was the third Friday after her run to Red Hollow when she stepped into the saloon, boots caked in red dust, a fresh coil of rope slung over her shoulder. She'd come for salt pork and lamp oil, same as any other ranch hand. But the hush that settled when she pushed open the door told her she wasn't just anyone to these folks. A trio of ranch boys leaned at the far table, boots up, whiskey half finished. The biggest one, Clyde Haskins, spat a sunflower seed and nudged his buddy with a smirk. "Look here, boys," Clyde drawled, voice lazy as a snake sunning itself. "It's the little widow what runs freight up the mountain. Tell me, Sadie, that ghost up there, Holloway, he pay you in silver dreams, or he got something else you're hauling back down, huh?" A few of the old-timers chuckled behind their mugs, not brave enough to meet her eyes. Sadie's jaw set tight. She could feel the hush growing thicker, heavy as the storm clouds she'd seen crawling over Red Hollow Ridge. She walked straight to Clyde's table, boots thunking on the warped floorboards. Didn't raise her voice, didn't even touch the pistol resting under her coat. Just leaned in close enough that the young ranch hand could smell the iron dust and pine pitch still clinging to her skin. "You listen close, Clyde Haskins," she said, her words soft but flint sharp. "The only thing I haul up that ridge is what a man can't get himself. Firewood, flour, salt. And the only thing I'd bring back is the guts of any fool who tries to talk about me like I'm for sale. I shoot straighter than any son your daddy ever sired. Don't test me." Clyde's grin faltered. His buddies shifted, boots scraping the floor as they looked anywhere but her eyes. Sadie tipped her hat, bought her salt pork, and walked out without another word. Gossip, she figured, was a wolf you never truly killed, but sometimes you could make it back off, tail tucked between its legs. That winter, the runs to Red Hollow grew colder, but no less strange. It started small. The kind of small only a woman used to looking over her shoulder would ever notice. The fourth trip up, she found a wedge of river stone jammed under the loose axle of her wagon. She'd meant to fix that wheel a dozen times, never got to it. Now it sat steady as a church pew. No note, no sign, just done. Then it was the fence along the lower switchback trail. A length of wire she knew was sagging, pulled tight and knotted clean. No footprints, no wagon marks. Just a hand that worked the land the way a man works a broken heart. Quiet, steady, alone. But the thing that made her breath catch came a week before the first big snow. She dropped her scarf. Elijah's old trail scarf, the one he'd wrapped around her neck the day he left for the Rio Grande. She'd worn it thin and patched it twice over, refused to trade it for new cloth because it still smelled like him when the wind cut deep enough. She didn't notice it was gone until she was halfway down the mountain. She cursed herself for being careless. Next delivery, when she stacked a bundle of oats by the porch, she saw it, folded perfect on top of the crates. Not a speck of dirt, just the clean scent of pine. She pressed it to her face like a prayer, eyes stinging, but she didn't let a single tear fall onto the snow. She should have let it lie there. The quiet give and take, the kindness she didn't have words for. But a woman alone learns that silence is its own kind of hunger. So on the next trip up, Sadie reached into her wagon for the stub of pencil she kept to tally goods, tore a scrap off a flour sack, wrote careful, "Cold night's coming, hope you've got enough firewood." She slipped it under the crate of salt pork, tamped it down with a boot heel. No answer that week. Or the next when she tried again. "Fox tracks near the hen house. Watch your chickens." Still nothing. The third time she told herself she wouldn't. She loaded flour, dry beans, and horseshoe nails, stacked them neat on the porch. Stood there longer than she meant to, hand brushing the frost off the crate lid. The forest felt thicker than ever. pine shadows leaning close, like they could swallow every word she'd ever wanted to say. When she drove back down, she scolded herself. Fool woman talking to ghosts. But when she got home, stabling Finch in the old livery barn behind Mercy Hill's grain store, she noticed something tucked under the lid of her supply crate. Rough paper torn from a ledger, folded once, blocky letters pressed hard enough to groove the wood. 3 words. I hear you. Sadie read it once, then again. Her thumb brushed the grooves. A reply. Not a thank you. Not a promise. Just an echo in the cold. But it warmed her in places she hadn't let the sun reach in years. She tucked it inside her coat pocket, close to where she still kept Elijah's letter. The ghost on the ridge wasn't so silent after all. And maybe, just maybe, neither was she. Sadie should have trusted her gut when the sky turned mean that morning. She'd seen the way the frost clung stubborn to the ridge, how the mule's breath fogged like steam from a boiler, and how the trees stood so still it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. But supply runs didn't wait on weather or superstition. Not when folks needed flour and salt, and a man like Wyatt Holloway needed so little but trusted her to bring it all the same. She took the high trail to Red Hollow, the wagon wheels crunching over brittle snowpack, the wind whispering through the pines like old ghosts. Just past a blind switchback, her rear wheel slipped, catching ice hidden under a powder drift. The wagon lurched sideways, wood creaking loud enough to wake the dead. Sadie braced her boots against the driver's rail. Too late. She tumbled hard onto her side, cheek pressed to the frozen earth, vision swimming with shards of white sky and dark tree trunks. The mule brayed and stomped, but the real sound that cut through was the snap of a branch behind her. Too close, too careful to be the wind. A figure stepped out from the shadows. A man rough-bearded, coat patched with so many colors, it looked like a rag quilt. His eyes glittered under a pulled-down hat brim. One hand gripped the butt of a rusty revolver. The other flicked toward the scattered crates. Well now, the drifter rasped, voice oily as lamp soot. What's a pretty little widow like you got stashed in there, huh? Or maybe, who paid you to haul it? Sadie forced herself to push up on one elbow, though the world wobbled at the edges. Take what you want, she bit out, chin bloody. But there's no gold here, just beans and flour. Don't lie to me. He stepped closer, spit hissing on the snow. I heard about that Holloway bastard. Word is he's got silver veins buried under this trail. I want the stash. Now. He lunged. Sadie's hands clawed for the revolver tucked behind her back, but he was faster. A boot slammed into her ribs, knocking the wind out of her lungs. Her vision exploded in red sparks. Somewhere in the blackness, she heard her own voice, a ragged whisper against the cold. Don't let me die alone. Up on Red Hollow Ridge, Wyatt Holloway watched the same sky darken with a stillness that made the hairs at his neck stand up. He'd paced the porch twice already, boots creaking on old wood, eyes tracing the path where Sadie's wagon should have appeared an hour ago. When dusk bled into purple, he couldn't stand the waiting anymore. He saddled his horse, an old broad-shouldered roan, and rode out, every hoofbeat a drum in his ribs. The snow swallowed sound, but his ears caught the faint echo of a mule's bray carried on the wind. And something else. A shout, sharp, panicked. Wyatt found her at the bend. Her wagon was half tilted into a ditch, crates smashed open, her coat sleeve bright against the snow like spilled ink. A single scrap of her red scarf fluttered from a branch. He dismounted so hard his boots skidded in the slush. Sadie, he rasped, his voice raw from years of disuse. He knelt, gloved hands hovering over the gash at her temple. Her lashes fluttered, breath shallow as moth wings. He heard her whisper again, so faint he thought it might be his own guilt talking back. Don't! Let me die alone! A branch snapped. Wyatt turned just as the drifter barreled at him, eyes wild, revolver raised. But desperation was no match for fury honed in silence. Wyatt ducked the first swing, shoulders slammed the man backward into a snow-dusted pine. They grappled hard, fists thudding against rough coats. Wyatt's revolver flew from his hip, disappearing into the brush. The drifter drew a knife, but Wyatt caught his wrist, slammed it down once, twice until bone cracked like dry kindling. A savage punch to the jaw sent the man sprawling in the snow, breath ragged and bleeding. Wyatt didn't spare him a second glance. He stumbled back to Sadie, cradling her against his chest. Her head lolled, blood trickling over his collar. "I've got you," he murmured, voice cracked but certain, the promise of a man who'd waited too long to say anything at all. He heaved her onto the saddle before him, arms tight around her limp body. The drifter's groans faded behind them as Wyatt Holloway rode into the storm, carrying not just Sadie Quinn's weight, but the truth that some treasures were never meant to be buried alone. Sadie Quinn woke to the crackle of firelight and the ache of half-healed ribs. For a heartbeat, she didn't know where she was. Only that warmth pressed into her bones like a second skin. She shifted on the narrow cot, blankets pulled high, and felt the rough weight of a hand over hers. Wyatt Holloway sat beside her, boots planted wide on the cabin floor, hat discarded on the table. His thumb traced circles across her bandaged knuckles, as if to remind himself she was still there, that he hadn't dreamed up her heartbeat steady under his palm. When her eyes met his, a smile ghosted across his weathered face, awkward but real. He looked older in the glow, lines at the corner of his eyes, a fresh cut stitched clumsy along his brow. She reached out with her good hand, brushed her fingers over it. He flinched, just a little, and she let out a soft laugh that startled them both. "Hurts, doesn't it?" she teased, voice hoarse. Wyatt huffed, a breath that might have been a laugh if he remembered how to let it out. "Not as bad as you did," he murmured. They sat like that for a while, saying nothing. She forced herself to rise from the cot, ignoring the pull in her side, and fetched a rag and warm water from the kettle. She made him sit on the edge of the bed while she cleaned the dried blood from his temple. He winced when she dabbed at the cut, which only made her smirk wider. "Don't be such a baby, Holloway." He looked at her then, eyes dark and soft all at once. "Most folks just call me Wyatt." Sadie paused, rag halfway to the basin. The crackle of the fire seemed louder than before, filling the places they didn't know how to speak through yet. She settled beside him, folded legs tucked under the worn quilt, and poured them each a cup of bitter tea from the tin kettle. It tasted like pine bark and old sorrow, but she drank it anyway. In the hush, words came out that neither of them had meant to share. She told him about Elijah, about the letter stiff with dried blood, about nights on the road when she wondered if living was worth the long, cold years ahead. Wyatt talked about the chapel he built for a bride who never said yes, about gold that couldn't buy back trust, about the quiet so thick some days it felt like it might swallow him whole. When his hands curled tight around his cup, she laid her palm over his. Her thumb brushed the scar along his knuckles, the same hand that lifted her from the snow like she was something worth saving. "You can fence in land, Wyatt Holloway," she said softly, eyes locked on his. "But you can't fence in your heart forever." He didn't argue. He just looked at her like he was memorizing the edges of her face in the firelight, like he'd never seen anything braver than a woman telling him he didn't have to hide anymore. A week later, when her bruises bloomed yellow instead of black, he led her out to the garden they'd dug last fall. Spring hadn't yet touched the soil, but the promise of it lingered in the damp earth under their boots. Wyatt dropped to one knee in the brittle grass, his coat brushing the dirt. In his palm lay a rough iron band. No diamonds, no polish. Just a simple circle, forged from the old gate latch that once kept strangers out. "No diamonds," he said, voice low but sure. "Just me. Will you stay?" Sadie's breath hitched, tears stinging her wind-chapped cheeks. She took the ring, turned it over in her fingers, felt the warmth of his palm underneath. "I'm not here for what you buried," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm here for what you keep alive." They went on a morning when the air smelled like wet earth and wild sage. The half-built chapel stood at the edge of Red Hollow, its beams grayed by years of wind, but still strong enough to hold the echoes of vows that never were, and the ones that finally would be. Sadie's hair was braided back with sprigs of wildflowers she'd picked at dawn. She wore no white dress, just her best linen skirt, and the old shawl Wyatt had once draped over her shoulders when the mountain tried to steal her warmth. Wyatt stood waiting for her under the open rafters, coat brushed clean, but boots still muddy. There was no preacher, no gold rings or fancy words. Just Gideon, the old prospector, raising a flask and hollering, "By these hills and the folks here," Your husband and wife, enough for the world. Laughter carried up through the pines. Someone scratched out a tune on a battered fiddle with only 3 good strings. Neighbors who'd once whispered behind Sadie's back now pressed jars of preserves into her arms, old blankets, and fresh-cut kindling, gifts that mattered more than gold ever could. That night after the last lantern flickered out and the guests drifted home down the ridge, Sadie climbed up into the old wagon one final time. Under the seat, behind a false plank, she found them. Elijah's letters. Brittle with age, the ink faded, but the memories still sharp enough to bleed. She held them to her chest, eyes pricking with tears that came softer than they used to. Then she struck a match. Under the hush of a black Wyoming sky, Sadie fed each page to the flames, letting the past curl into ash that drifted over the wildflower beds she and Wyatt would plant come spring. When the dawn came, they stood together on the porch at Red Hollow. The hammer Wyatt had used to mend the fence leaned against the rail. Her hand found his, rough palms pressed tight, a promise stitched tighter than any deed or coin could bind. No one would ever carve their names into silver veins buried deep under this ridge. But trust, real trust, needed no map to find its way home. The wind stirred the pines like an old lullaby. Wyatt's arm curled around Sadie's waist, her head resting where his heartbeat was steady as the land beneath them. Home, she thought, wasn't walls or acres or the fortune folks still whispered he'd hidden. Home was the hand that didn't let go, no matter the storm. Long before Sadie ever drove her first crate up Red Hollow Ridge, the old prospector, Gideon, had been digging holes in that same frozen ground, chasing a silver vein he swore the mountain was hiding from him. Folks in Mercy Hill called him Gideon the Fool, said he'd lost more pickaxes than teeth, and he was down to just a few of each. One evening, after Sadie faced down the ranch hands at the saloon, she found Gideon leaning against the rail out back, staring at the moon like it might whisper secrets if he squinted hard enough. He smelled of pine tar and stale whiskey, but his eyes were clear as creek water when he started talking. "Thing about these hills, Miss Quinn," he said, picking at a hangnail. "They don't give up what you're looking for. Not unless you stop digging for what you think you want." She frowned, boots crunching in the frost. "And what is it you found up there, Gideon? Silver? Gold?" He chuckled, reached into the pocket of his ragged coat, and drew out a simple iron wedding band, dulled with age but stubbornly whole, not a fleck of rust on it. "Found this half buried under the roots of a spruce. Didn't find no treasure chest, didn't find no fancy claim. Just this." He rolled it between his fingers, like it weighed more than a vein of ore. "Made me think, maybe what's buried in these hills ain't rock at all. Maybe it's second chances, waiting for folks who know when to stop digging." Sadie tucked that truth away, let it burn slow behind her ribs on nights when the road to Red Hollow turned black and her doubts felt heavier than any freight. When the time came, it was Wyatt who led her to the half-built chapel, the same one he'd once hammered together for a wedding that never happened. The frame still stood, stubborn against wind and time, sagebrush pushing up through the floorboards like defiance. Together they cleared out the rot, laid down new planks, and left the rafters open to the sun. It didn't matter that it was unfinished. That chapel wasn't a monument to what Wyatt lost anymore. It was a shelter for what they'd found together, a promise that the wildest places can still hold the gentlest roots. In the end, Sadie Quinn and Wyatt Holloway's story isn't just about a wagon overturned on an icy trail or a cabin hidden deep in the pines. It's about something all of us, no matter how young or old, carry inside. The hope that trust can grow again, even when life has broken us once or twice before. Maybe today you don't haul crates up a mountain or patch fences with your bare hands, but we still build walls around our hearts, don't we? We still stand on porches of our own making, waiting for someone to come down the trail and remind us we don't have to stand there alone. In a world that feels colder than ever, maybe the real gold isn't money in the bank. It's a hand that doesn't let go when the storms come. A word left on a note that says, "I hear you," or a second chance buried in the roots of the life you're brave enough to plant again. What do you think? Can trust really be rebuilt after betrayal? Is love worth fighting for even when silence feels safer? Tell us below. your thoughts, your own second chances, or the treasures you found in unexpected places. Thank you for sitting with this tale today. If you believe we need more stories like Sadie and Wyatt's, stories that remind us to keep our hearts open, even in the harshest season, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more Wild West love stories that carry hope forward, one porch light at a time.